UFC 302 is going down this weekend, with the main event being the lightweight champion Islam Makhachev defending his title against Dustin the Diamond Poirier. Now, I'd be lying big time if I said I wasn't cheering hard for Dustin Poirier. The man is a fan favorite, he has delivered countless moments in the UFC, and I think a lot of folks are actually cheering for Dustin this time around. All due respect to Islam Makhachev, he is the undisputed champion, but Dustin Poirier is a fan favorite for a reason. He delivers a lot of great moments, and he's always in exciting fights. The other reason why a lot of folks, including myself, might be cheering for Dustin Poirier is this is probably his last shot at a UFC championship belt. He's had a few opportunities, most notably the loss against Khabib Nurmagomedov and the loss against Charles Oliveira. He comes up just short when it comes time to actually win the undisputed championship belt. So with this being the last shot and this video really being a celebration of the diamond, I want to look back and recall 5 of my favorite Dustin Poirier fights. Disclaimer ahead of time, a lot of these fights have a very similar theme of coming back from adversity, being in an absolute drag out of a fight, usually 5-rounder, or have some kind of redemption moment. Also of note, it was really hard to rank these, so take the ranking with a grain of salt. Number 5, I'm going to let recency bias come into play, and again, kind of what I was saying earlier, there is a theme of being an underdog or some kind of redemption story in Dustin's fights. In this case, it was number 5 is happening to be Poirier against Benoit Saint-Denis. This took place somewhat recently at UFC 299, and a lot of people were not giving Dustin the credit that he deserved in this fight. A lot of folks, I think even the betting odds were saying that the likely outcome was that Benoit Saint-Denis, being the rising star, was going to end up getting the finish against Poirier, maybe even retiring Dustin Poirier, and the betting odds reflected that. In the end, put some respect on the Diamond's name. He ended up getting the KO on Benoit Saint-Denis, the rising Frenchman, in the second round. It was a wild fight, high-paced, a lot of energy from the very start, and Dustin ended up getting the finish and ended up resulting in the title shot at UFC 302. Number 4, I'm going to pick Dustin Poirier against Michael Chandler at UFC 281. This was a fight that had a lot of bad blood between the two guys, just talking a lot online, just insults back and forth between the two of each other, maybe a little bit of lack of respect from Chandler to Poirier, or vice versa, depending how you see it. But this was also Dustin coming off of a loss. Dustin Poirier had just lost his second title shot against Charles Oliveira. And then Dustin getting a little bit up there in age. There was a lot of questions about what did Dustin have left. Was he just going to be in exciting fights? What was the next move going to be for Dustin Poirier? Because he did have to fight a worthy contender, and Chandler was absolutely a worthy contender. Again, an exciting fight from start to finish for as long as it lasted. Ultimately, Dustin Poirier ended up getting the submission rear naked choke on Michael Chandler in the 3rd round, and that was at UFC 281. Really exciting moment. Still kind of tripping a little bit back and forth, the two of them at the end of the fight, but I loved it from the very beginning. Dustin had a lot to prove, and he proved it here. Number 3 is Dustin Poirier versus Dan Hooker. Right in the thick of COVID, summer of 2020 at the Apex. Not a single fan in the crowd. Quiet atmosphere. This was a wild time for UFC and combat sports as a whole, because every respected promotion had to go into their own bubble to put on fights to no crowd, but they wanted to not just fulfill their contract obligations to fighters, but also fulfill their contract obligations with whatever TV or streaming platform they were on. This was really interesting because this fight went the distance and both guys put a beating on each other, but Dustin ended up getting the unanimous decision win against Dan Hooker. This was a war from start to finish, and what echoed it and made it even crazier was the noise and the sound that you could hear of every single punch, every single kick landing, the guys breathing hard. When there is no fan in the crowd, the Apex is a crazy place to hold fights, especially during this time, during COVID, when everything was on lockdown. This was Poirier still trying to find if he could get another title shot, climb the rankings, still be in exciting fights, and Dan Hooker was really trying to bait him by talking a lot before the fight. In the end, the Diamond really proved who he was, why he's still a worthy contender, And this was an absolute classic moment in not just, I think, Dustin Poirier's career, but in UFC history. Number 2 has to come in, has to be Alvarez versus Poirier 2. This was a UFC on Fox card in July of 2018, where this was actually a rematch of Eddie Alvarez and Dustin Poirier. The first fight had a lot of controversy, ended up in a no contest due to an illegal knee from Eddie Alvarez. Now, what sparked the flames of a lot of this feud was Eddie Alvarez, after that first fight, claiming that Dustin Poirier quit and did not want to continue. So Dustin came into this fight with a big chip on his shoulder, really not liking the fact that Eddie Alvarez accused him of quitting. This ended up in a TKO of round 2. Dustin put the hurt on Eddie Alvarez, ended up getting the finish, and still was jawing a lot after the fight, saying that he does not quit, he never quits, and he came in to prove something on this fight. This was a crazy moment and a really big validation for the Diamond after some accusations of him wanting to quit in the first fight, which is ludicrous. And now comes to my number 1 favorite fight of Dustin Poirier's career. It's probably not everybody's favorite. It doesn't even deserve to be one of the best fights in general. But it was a satisfying moment to me to see Dustin Poirier get the knockout of Conor McGregor in the second time that they fought. This was at UFC 257, January 2021. We were still kind of in lockdown, but there were events being held in Abu Dhabi at Yas Island. This was at the Emirates Stadium. After their first meeting, we all know how that went. That was a quick knockout from Conor McGregor on Dustin Poirier, and we were wondering if Dustin would ever get the opportunity to right the wrong and get that second crack at Conor McGregor. And if they did, how would that meeting look, especially with Conor McGregor being such a big star? After some time off, Conor McGregor was coming back. He had a fight against Donald Cerrone January 2020. This was a year later after that, after Conor had that big win. And we were still curious about what Conor had left. But more importantly, was Dustin's emotions going to get the best of him in this fight? Was he going to let the memory of the first fight and any kind of disdain for Conor McGregor after that first fight affect his judgment, affect the fight, and how the outcome was going to turn out? In the end, it didn't mean anything because Dustin came out ready, prepared. One could debate Conor McGregor's preparation. He could look a little weird going into this fight. Apparently, he was preparing for a boxing camp, or so he says, as he was looking to box Manny Pacquiao. But ultimately, whatever he did not prepare him enough for this fight because Dustin made pretty short work of him. Dustin ended up getting the TKO win in the second round. So seeing Conor just laying there, slumped over, knocked out, we hadn't really seen anything like that before. That was crazy to see. And to cap off the moment, an iconic photo from Dustin Poirier just pointing at Conor McGregor, letting him know, I ended up getting the win over you. And not just the win, the TKO finish. Bad blood was not going to be over because they were going to fight a third time, but this was my favorite moment of Dustin's career. So there you have it. Celebration of the Diamond, Dustin Poirier. Looking forward to the fight. Excited to see what's going to happen. And for somehow, some way, Islam Makhachev is a very dominant champion, but I'm really hoping that the Diamond pulls this one off on Saturday.